Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Pei Amud Aleph at the very top. The Gemara continues to discuss various shiurim for Meleches Hoitzah. Says the Gemara, the next shiur is Diyoi Kedei Lichtoiv Shtei Oisios. Our Mishnah says enough diyo, enough ink to write two osios. That's the shiur choshuv to Mechayiv Korban Chatos. Says the Gemara, Tana bringing a brisa. Shtei oisios b'diyoi, v'shtei oisios b'kulmus, shtei oisios b'kulmorin. Here the brisa tells us that the shiur is going to be when it comes to two oisios that are written with dry dio. That means enough dio that's dry is sufficient to make two oisios, or two oisios in a kulmus, in the quill itself, again, or in order to then write two oisios, or two oisios in what's called an ink well. That's the little place where the scribe keeps his ink. So if he takes that little place with him, that little compartment, the little ink well with him, it would have to be sufficient to write two oisios. Boi rova ois achas b'diyoi, ois achas b'kulmus, ois achas b'kolmorin. If you take one of these items, either and mix them one with the next, an ois of dio together with an os of kulmus, so then does that mitztaref? So according to many of the mafarshim, the amount of ink that you need to write two oisios of dio is different than the amount of ink that you need to write two oisios when it's in the kulmus. And therefore the shaila does it mitztaref, to which the Gemara leaves it as an undecided question. Teiku, it leaves it standing unanswered. Omar Rava asked the following question, or he says the following halacha: Hoitzi shtei oisios v'kosvon keshu mahalich chayev. If a person takes out two oisios and he writes them while he is walking, he's going to be chayev for the hoitzah. Aside from the ksiva, that's a separate malacha. We're talking about the malacha of hoitzah. The malacha of hoitzah he will be chayev for. Kesivosen zuhi hanachosen. He explains because even though we know that for a malacha of hoitzah you need an akira as well as a hanacha. An akira, you have to take out the object from one reshus and then put it down into another reshus. Because over here he wrote down the letters, even though he continued to walk, it's considered to be stationary because that's where the letters will remain on the paper that he's writing on. And therefore it's considered to be hanacha gabe, the malach of hoitzah. The Omar Rava goes on to say more halachos. Hoitzi ois achas v'kosva v'chozer v'hoitzi ois achas v'kosva potter. If he takes out enough ink to write one letter and he writes it down, and then he goes ahead and takes out another amount of ink to write a second letter, he's going to be potter. Ask the Gemara, my time or why? We're talking about behelem echod, in one forgetful period. So why is he potter? After all, he wrote two letters. That means to say that he was able to be moitzi, a shiur of dio of two letters. Answers the Gemara, be'idna da'afka librasraisa, when he brought out the second amount of ink to write the second letter, the first letter had already dried out, where it becomes less than the shear that you need to be moitzi from one reshus to another reshus. So it comes out to be less than a full two osios. The Omar Rav goes on to explain another halacha. If he takes out one half of a measurement, one half of a dried fig, a gogeres, and he puts it down. And we're talking about something that's connected with oichel, where the shiur chashuv is a gogeres. So he takes out half of that shiur and puts it down on the reshus, let's say harabim. Then he goes in and takes out another half of a grogeres, a chetzi shiur, and he brings it now into the Rishus Harabim and he puts that down. Rishoy nanase kemishe kolto kelev oishe nisrafa upater. He explains that the first one as if it was grabbed, it was caught by a dog, or as if it was burnt, whereby it's not mistaref to the second chetzi, and it's potter. Frek the Gemara right away, v'mai. Why? There was already hanacha, hamoncha. He already put it down. So it's not like it was nisraf. It didn't disappear. It remained over there on the ground. So when he brought out the second half, so then he put it down, he has 2 chetzi shiurim with 1 helem echad. He should be chayiv. Hochi ka'amar. This is what Rava meant to say. V'im kodam v'higbia rishoina koidem hanocha shniya nasis rishoina kamisha niklata oisha nisrfa upotter. Rava said that if he takes the first one that he put down and he then takes that out, he picks it up and takes it out, then he brings the second half a shear and places it down, then it's not mitzaref. It's as if the first half a shear was nisrafa, because it's no longer there. Says the Gemara, Vaiter Amar Rava, another halacha, hoitzi chatzi grogeres v'hinicha. He takes a half a grogeres and he puts it down in the Rishus Harabim. V'chazer v'hoitzi chatzi grogeres v'heviro derech alel. And then he goes back to the Rishus HaYachid and takes out another half a grogeres, and he continues to walk by the first grogeres. He says he's going to be chayav. I asked the Gemara, we know that you need a hanacha. Where was the hanacha if he was walking the Rishus Harabim with a chetzi grogeres hasheni? V'amai holoi nach. The second half of grogeres didn't nach to be mitzaref with the first half. So how can he be chayiv? Answers Rava Kigoin shehe'evira toich shloisha, because he walked by the first half and he was close enough that was toich shloisha tfachim of the first half of shir, the first half of grogeres, whereby Rava is saying that itself is a concept of lavud. Halacha l'Moshe Misina, we say that it's as if it's closed, whereby it's as if he placed down the item, the half a grogeres that he was carrying, hasheni, and therefore it was out mitzaref to the first half of grogeres that's already munach on the ground. Ask the Gemara, Rava explains the Chachamim as requiring that there be a hanacha on something. It's not sufficient that there be a hanacha, that there be no hanacha, that he walks and you say lavud. Rabban don't say lavud. They don't say that it can go ahead and be considered as if it's munach on the karka if he's walking. The Gemara says lo kasha, kan bezorek, kan b'ma'avir. There's a machloikis in the Tanoim. Rabbi Akiva says kluta kamisha hun chodamya. That means that when you throw from the Rishus HaYachid through the Rishus HaRabim into another Rishus HaYachid, according to Rabbi Akiva, it's considered to be munach, as if it now rested in the Rishus HaRabim, because it was kalut, it was kluta kamisha hun chodamya, as if it was then absorbed by the Rishus HaRabim. However, the Rabbanan argue and say, no, we don't say kluta kamisha hun chodamya, and therefore it has to be munach, has to be placed, in that case, in the Rishus HaRabim. However, Rava goes on to say, even when it comes to gimel tfachim, we don't say kluta kamisha hun chodamya by zrika, but when you're zorek. However, when it comes to mavir, when you're walking, that's different. There we do say toich gimel tfachim. Even the Rabbanan would agree that it's considered to be as if it's munach, and therefore the 2 half grogeres are going to be mitzaref to make a shir to chayiv chatas. Tanu Rabbanan, Vaita Gemara brings a brisa, hoitzi chetzi grogeres v'chazev hoitzi chetzi grogeres behelam echod chayiv. The first part of the brisa is straightforward. He takes half of a grogeres and he brings it out into the Rishus HaRabim. Then he goes out and he takes another half of a grogeres and he puts it and he brings it to the Rishus HaRabim, and thereby he's chayiv because the 2 are mitzarf is behelam echod. Bishtei ha'alamo is potter. However, if he became aware after putting the first half down that he is indeed doing a malacha, thereby he becomes aware the second half is not mitzaref. That's a machlok as we saw. But according to this Tana, it's potter, it's not mitzaref. Rabbi Yosi oimer behelem echod l'rishus echod chayav. Rabbi Yossi says in the first case of the Tanakama, when we're talking about Behelam Echad, it's only if he puts it into the same Rishus Harabim as the first Chetzi Shiur. Then we say it's Mitzdarif to Mechayiv. However, if he puts the first half of Grogeres in one Rishus Harabim, and then he places the other half of Grogeres in a different Rishus Harabim, not connected, then it's not Mitzdarif. Now the Gemara explains the position of Rabbi Yossi to say, when is that true that we say that it has to be in the same Rishus to be Mitzdarif? Omar Rabbi, v'hu sheyesh chiyuv chatas beineim, aval karmelis lo. That's providing that there will be a chiyuv chatas. That means that there will be, let's say, a Rishus HaYachid in between the two Rishus HaRabim. Then we say that's going to separate the two Rishuyos, whereby the Chetzi Grogeres and the first Rishus HaYachid, Harabim rather, will not be mitzdarf to the second shear in the second Rishus Harabim, because the Rishus HaYachid, which is a chiyuv chatas, will separate. However, Karmelis, which is derabanan, according to this opinion of Rabbah, is not going to then separate, and it will be mechayiv even though there are two different Rishuyos, meaning two different Rishus Harabims, because separated by a Karmelis. Abaye Omar afilu Karmelis, even a Karmelis does not indeed make it so that it does indeed separate rather the two Rishus Harabims, whereby he will not be chayiv if one half is placed in one and one half placed in the other. Aval pisla loy. But if there is wood that is throughout the width of, let's say, the Rishus Harabim, separating the two Rishus Harabims, that, he says, will not be considered to be a separation, whereby even if you put half in one Rishus Harabim and half in the other Rishus Harabim, it still will be mitzdarif. Verova Omar, afilu pisla, even pisla, he says, will then separate between the two Rishuyos, whereby it's considered to be potter. When is it going to be chayiv? He says it's going to be chayiv that it's going to be chayiv only if it's going to be the same Rishus Harabim. But if it's two Rishus Harabim, even a pislo will separate. Says the Gemara to explain, Va'ozda Rava l'taimei, and Rava goes according to his reasoning, like he learned somewhere else, the Omar Rava Rishus Shabbos ki Rishus Gittin Damya. In regards to Gittin, the Gemara explains over there that if a Baal throws a get to the courtyard that he gave over to his wife in order to receive her get, he throws it but doesn't land in the courtyard, meaning on the ground of the courtyard, but rather on a pisla. So according to Rava, that's going to be a separate rishus, and thereby it's not as if she acquired the get, she wasn't mekabel the get, and she's not divorced. So too, Rava says over here, then this pisla is going to be a separate rishus, and thereby it will separate between the rishus harabims. That's what he means over there when he says the rishus Shabbos is kirishus gittin damya. Weiter, the Gemara now quotes the Mishnah. The next item is kechol kedei likchol ayin achas. Painting one's eye, the shear of one eye, says the Gemara, ayin achas. The Gemara says, does one only paint one eye? That should be the minimum shiur. Holokachli. They didn't paint both eyes, meaning that's the normal thing to do, whereby that should be the shiur, not the minimum shiur, to be one eye. Answers the Gemara, Rav Huna no shekein snuos, koichlos ayin achas. The snuos would go out really with only one eye painted, whereby it's not considered to be unusual, and that is the minimum shiur. Meisvei asked the Gemara, only one eye is painted. We find differently. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar mer kechol im lirefu. If it's for medicinal purposes, then kedei lichol ayin achas. Then it's for one eye. That's going to be sufficient because a person wants to cure their eye. They often only have one problem with one eye, not both eyes. So that's sufficient. However, im lekashet bebeis. But if it's to beautify oneself, then you have to have enough eye makeup for two eyes in order to then mechayiv one from going out. Answers the Gemara, Tirgama Hillel Beredi Reb Shmuel Bar Nachmeni Kitanya Hahu Be'Iranios. That means to say that the Iranios, the women that lived in the Kfarim, they were more modest. However, since they lived in the Kfarim, the Tznuos didn't have to then hide one eye, because there, the frivolity, the kalus roish, and the mode of behavior was not such that they had to then be on their guard even more more than normal, and therefore they would then indeed beautify themselves with two eyes, and that's what this Bryce is saying. But what our Mishnah is referring to is the typical place where a woman would go out, let's say in a regular year, and then she would have to then protect herself and be more nishmar, whereby she would then cover herself up and only allow one eye to be revealed. Only that one eye was going to be painted, and that's the sufficient for a minimum shiur of hoitzol. The next item in the Mishnah is shaiva, wax, kedei litein al pi nekev koton. The Gemara identifies what is this considered to be a nekev koton, that the amount of wax can cover it up. Tana kedei liton al pi nekev koton shel yayin. We're talking about a chavis of yayin, specifically wine, which is thin. The small hole to cover that up, the amount of wax to cover that small hole up. This comes to exclude when it comes to oil or comes to honey, which is much thicker. That requires a bigger amount of wax to then cover up a slightly bigger hole as well. Devek, the Mishnah says, what is the amount of devek that a person will be held liable for going out into the Rishus HaRabim with? Kedei liton beroish hashafshaf. So that when he puts the devek, amount of devek that he puts on top of the shafshaf, on the board. Explains the Gemara with a Bryce, Tano. Kedei liton beroish shafshaf, sheberoish kane shel tzaydin. The trappers of birds, they would put on the end of a reed a board, and then they would put a lot of devek so that when the bird comes and lands on the board, he'll become stuck on that board. The amount of devek that is used for that's the shiur minimum to mechayev chatos. The Mishnah goes on to say, zeves v'gofris k'dei lasois. Here we're talking about either zephes, either tar or sulfur, in order then, k'dei lasois, a nekev koton. Says the Gemara, bringing a Bryce Tana, k'dei lasos nekev koton. Here it's described as being a nekev koton, to allow mercury to then go through. They would first seal up a hole, then they would then also make a hole into this item, so that the mercury can come out slowly. So the amount of either zephes or gofris that is used to make this sealed hole, that itself is going to be considered to be the minimum shiur to bring out on Shabbos B'chayev a korban chatos. The next item on the list is charsis. This is crushed brick. What is the minimum amount? Says the Mishnah, k'dei lasos pi kur, to make a pi kur, that which is to refine the gold, this crucible. They would take the charosis and make a hole for this crucible. Says the Gemara, remember the shiur de Rabbi Yehuda nafish. Do you mean to say that Rabbi Yehuda's shiur is greater because Rabbi Yehuda argues, and Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it's not the size to make the opening of this crucible, of this gold refinery, this small crucible, but because Rabbi Yehuda says the shiur is k'dei la'asos pitput, to make a tripod that this crucible is standing on. So this sounds to be a greater shiur of crushed brick. And that's the Gemara's question. How could that be? We already established that the Rabbanan shiur are greater than Rabbi Yehuda's shiur when it comes out to the Malach of Hoitzah in our Mishnah. Disnan, as it says earlier on the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda omer kedei litol heminu midas mina lekotan. Unlike the first two items that the Tanakama used when he said that a person wants to then make a chevel, that has to be a shiur of making a handle of a container, of a basket. So Rabbi Yehuda argued and said, no, it's the shiur of a minal koton. And also when it comes to the shiur of a gemi, the Tanakama says that's to make a loop to then hang a sieve, to which again Rabbi Yehuda argued and said, no, it's a smaller shiur. It's a shiur to then to measure the minal of a koton. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda is more mekil. Answers the Gemara, it doesn't mean that he says over here to make a tripod, even though it says la'asois. Kedei la'asos doesn't mean to make, it means to fix. Ema kedei la'asud, pitput kiro ketana. It means that to take seed, lime, and fix those parts of the tripod that became damaged, and they had, let's say, grooves in it. So then in order to then cover up those grooves, and to then make it solid once again, that fixing up is the shear, according to Rabbi Yehuda, which is a much smaller shear than the Tana Kama.